The time is now for the Dr. Bob Sports Podcast. I am Tanner. I am our head of analytics, and I am in my 8th year working alongside Bob to originate our NFL and college basketball bets. And today, as always, I am joined by our digital media specialist, Grant. 3 divisions to go, and today we've got what I would consider to be a revitalized AFC South.
Yeah, this is an exciting division. I mean, looking at their win totals, they're up from 7.5 on average last season to 8.2 for this year. So I think these 4 teams are looking good.
Yeah, but before we get going, I want to mention that Bob is going to be releasing his college football win totals sometime mid next week. So you're going to want to sign up. If you plan on getting the college football package this season, you're going to want to go to drbobsports.com and sign up sometime this weekend because you do not want to miss before he absolutely obliterates that college football win total market.
No, you definitely want to get in on that. But today's episode, we're going to touch on some fantasy advice. We're going to share a futures bet later in the podcast, but let's get started with our team previews. And we are starting here with the Houston Texans coming off of that 10-7 season. And remember, they came in with low expectations and they started 0-2, but the offense absolutely clicked after hitting on their CJ Stroud and Tank Dell draft picks. And this team has absolutely loaded up their roster for 2024, and their win total is set at 9.5.
Yeah. And CJ Stroud had one of the best rookie seasons in recent memory. He was so good, it's hard to go up from here. So we could pull up that table. It was a good chart that Cleve TA tweeted out, and you could see that none of the quarterbacks that averaged more than 0.05 EPA per play as a rookie improved by more than 0.07 EPA per play in year 2. So that's telling me that Stroud has a chance to get better, but it isn't going to be into one of the league's elite offenses. He's not going to be like, I know there's some MVP buzz for Stroud. I wouldn't expect that here in year 2, like some are expecting. The Texans finished 13th in scoring last season. The market thinks they're going to be 9th in scoring in 2024, and that sounds about right to me.
Yeah, it does feel like Stroud is going to be helped by the improvements with his supporting cast here. And last year, the backups accounted for 45% of the offensive line snaps.
Mm-hmm. And they still finished 12th in pass blocking efficiency. That's a real feather in the cap for offensive coordinator Bobby Slowick, who was getting some head coaching looks this offseason. But the run game was terrible. Our metrics had the Texans' ground game 1.9 points worse than average. And you have to think that's going to get better having more continuity on the offensive line rather than just a new guy in every single week like there was last year.
All right, well, looking back to April 3rd, the Bills traded Stephon Diggs to the Texans, making this team one of the most dangerous receiving corps in the NFL.
Yeah, and in addition to Diggs, they're also going to get better at wide receiver, just benefiting from a similar health boost as the offensive line. I mean, you look at it, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Robert Woods, and Noah Brown combined to miss 23 games last season.
Yeah, so it sounds like we expect the offensive line and receiver production to be much better, but you think they're only going to improve a few spots in scoring?
Well, I'm not sure this offense is going to air it out as much as people think, which is going to cap the upside here. So Bobby Slowick wants to establish it. He's coming over from that Kyle Shanahan tree, and they run the hell out of the ball to try and set the defenses up in those single high looks. And they sort of gave up on that style midway through last year when they realized how bad the run game was. But now they're going to have the offensive line to run the ball. And remember, this is DeMeco Ryans' defensive head coach. He likely wants to run the ball, play more conservative football. So I don't think this is going to all of a sudden be a team that's playing in shootouts. I think, 8th or 9th in scoring sounds about right.
All right, well, let's move it over to that defense. And the market expected them to finish 31st last season, and they massively overachieved. However, there's a fair amount of turnover here, losing 2 off-ball linebackers with Blake Cashman and Denzel Perriman, as well as 3 guys along the defensive line with Jonathan Grenard, Malik Collins, and Sheldon Rankins.
Yeah, and those 3 ranked 2nd, 3rd, and 4th on this team in pressures. They combined for 23.5 sacks. And one of the guys they brought in for reinforcements on the defensive line after losing those 3 guys was Danico Autry. They paid him 2 years, $20 million. He got suspended for 6 games for violating the NFL PED policy. So now the big addition on the defensive line to start the season, the only guy they brought in to replace all that production out the door, is Danielle Hunter. He ranked 20th in pass rushing efficiency last season. He's going to rush off the opposite edge of Will Anderson, who ranked 14th in pass rushing efficiency as a rookie.
Yeah, I think those are some pretty good additions, but it looks like the big question for this unit is going to be a cornerback.
Yeah. And Derek Stingley's a good player, but it looks like they're going to ask a lot right away from second-round rookie Kamari Lassiter. And then the guys behind him, when they have to go to nickel, Desmond King, CJ Henderson, Jeff Okudah, it's not looking that good. So I like the pass rush, particularly when Autry comes off suspension, but it's a little shaky at cornerback. I think this is a borderline top 10 defense for DeMeco Ryans.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our next team here. And we've got the Indianapolis Colts coming off of that 9-8 season. And remember, this was another team with low expectations, but they battled all year long despite losing the rookie QB early on in the season. And I mean, this seems to be like one of the public's favorite teams, but they got a 2024 win total set at just 8.5.
Yeah. The Colts nearly made the playoffs last season with Gardner Minshew, but then they possibly had the least eventful offseason of any team in the NFL. You could argue bringing in Joe Flacco to replace Minshew at backup quarterback was their most impactful addition in all of free agency.
Yeah, it kind of seems like they're just counting on making the leap with Richardson coming back and being healthy.
Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit pre-show, but I'm not really convinced that Richardson this season is going to give them much better production than they got from Minshew. So you look at last season, they had the exact same 43.4% success rate, and Minshew had a better EPA plus CPOE composite score. Minshew also graded better than Richardson in PFF. So now we're seeing the stats and film agree that at least last year, Minshew was a little bit better than Richardson. Richardson was known as a raw prospect coming out, and the Colts offense was ranked 28th in market priors last year. Now, 98 dropbacks later, everyone's ready to crown this offense as one of the league's best. So he is going to get better in another offseason as a pro working with Shane Steichen. I'm not saying that Anthony Richardson can't be a great player in the NFL, but I think it's more likely to happen next season or the season after. I think it's hard to believe that this offense is going to take a significant leap from where they were in 2023.
Are you worried at all about the way that Richardson plays? I mean, do you think we might see Joe Flacco for an extended period of time this season?
Well, that I'm not worried about. I mean, Richardson's a huge guy. He's like Josh Allen, Cam Newton size. So those guys didn't get injured too often. And I don't think Richardson is going to get injured too often in his career either. I think he got unlucky with injuries last year. And Shane Steichen agrees. When asked whether or not he was going to run Richardson as much this season, Steichen responded, "Are you going to limit Steph Curry from shooting 3-pointers?" Saying that, this is one of his best skill sets, one of the things we need to lean into as a strength. And he had a 15% design run rate last year, which is basically the same as Lamar Jackson. I'd expect that again in 2024.
All right, well, let's shift it over to the defense, which finished 28th in scoring last year, and they're pretty much running back the exact same unit with defensive coordinator Gus Bradley.
Yeah. I mean, they did draft Leatu Latu in the first round, but I don't think he's going to give them much more in his rookie season than they got last year from Samson Ebukam, who tore his Achilles in training camp. Remember, Ebukam led the team in sacks last season.
Yeah, many people thought this was a potential destination for L'Jarius Sneed, but they're just going to trust 2 second-year starters in Juju Brents and Jalen Jones on the outsides.
Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, that's looking a little bit shaky. DeForest Buckner goes down for this defense, and all of a sudden it's looking like it's got the worst talent in the NFL. So you've got bad talent, and you're not really going to make up for it with scheme. I mean, Gus Bradley's just going to run cover 3, sound cover 3. So, I mean, Ebukam's out. We're not expecting Leatu Latu to be Will Anderson. So I don't really, if they don't bring anyone in free agency, I don't really see how this defense isn't bottom 5 again.
Yeah, not exactly what Colts fans probably want to hear, but let's shift it over to our next team. We've got the Jacksonville Jaguars coming off that 9-8 season. And remember, they came in as heavy favorites to win the division, and they got off to a great start. I mean, they were sitting at 8-3 until the wheels absolutely fell off after some bad injury luck, and the team ended up losing 5 of 6 games to miss the playoffs. So looking for a reset here in 2024, and the win total set at 8.5.
Let's start on the defensive side of the ball with Jacksonville. They fire Mike Caldwell and bring in Ryan Nielsen at defensive coordinator. He was great in his debut as a defensive coordinator last year with the Falcons. He had the consistently rated above average in market for defense, despite Grady Jarrett being out for half the year.
Yeah, Nielsen earned his stripes as a D-line guy. I mean, he's going to love this group led by Josh Hines Allen, who ranked 3rd in pass rushing efficiency last season.
Yeah. And on the other edge, Trayvon Walker was the number 1 pick for a reason. 6'5", 270 pounds. Now, we know Trayvon Walker's not going to hit in a huge way, like a Myles Garrett or Nick Bosa top 5 pick, but he could still have a Jadeveon Clowney-esque career. And then on the inside, they bring in Eric Armstead, who ranked 10th in pass rushing efficiency with the 49ers last year. So the Jaguars were just league average in pressure rate last season, but I think this turns into one of the better pass rushes in the NFL under Ryan Nielsen.
Well, it's not looking as clean on the back end, though, after losing cornerback Darius Williams. I mean, he was an underrated guy. He had 15 forced incompletions in 2023, which was 5th most in the NFL.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're going to replace him with Ronald Darby. Looks like they're going to roll with Ronald Darby in that spot. And you could pull up the Judah Fortgang chart that he tweeted out, and you see that Ronald Darby ranked 3rd in separation prevented last year. So it could be all right replacing Darius Williams. But coverage historically isn't sticky, and Darby will be going into his age 30 season, so it could also go pretty poorly there. Now, moving to nickelback, I'm pretty excited about Darnell Savage, who was really solid for Green Bay back in 2020, and they're looking to revitalize his career by moving him from safety to nickelback in the same role that we saw Brian Branch play for the Lions last year, helping to limit the opposing run games when you're in nickel, but still being solid enough in coverage.
All right, well, moving over to the offense, it was a pretty disappointing stretch down the end of the year. I mean, it was especially bad for the Calvin Ridley experiment. I mean, that did not work out. He only averaged 1.57 yards per route run.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, I mean, they let Ridley go. They draft Brian Thomas in the first round. They bring in Gabe Davis, who ranked 20th in EPA per target last year. And then they kept the 2 good guys. Christian Kirk was 6th in yards per route run from the slot, and Evan Ingram was 7th in success rate among tight ends.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty solid group here for Trevor Lawrence, who got let down a lot by his receivers last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Lawrence had 14 interceptions last season. 4 of those came off of tipped or drop passes, and 6 of those came from miscommunications with his receivers. And those might have been avoided if he had practiced more in the back half of the year when he was fighting through that ankle sprain. So you look at Kevin Cole's adjusted quarterback efficiency over on his Substack, unexpected points. Lawrence would have ranked 4th in EPA per play after normalizing for drops, interceptions, yards after catch, defensive pass interference, fumbles, strength of schedule, and weather. I mean, looking at that chart, you can see that Trevor Lawrence was the most unlucky quarterback in the NFL in 2023.
All right, well, what do you think about the offensive line that's protecting Trevor Lawrence?
I don't really think Doug Peterson trusted that unit that much last season. He used so much quick game to protect those guys, and because with the scheme, he did protect them. I mean, Jacksonville's offensive line ranked 2nd in pass blocking efficiency in the 7 weeks that they had starting left tackle Cam Robinson getting more than 15 snaps. And I don't think they're going to take a step backwards in 2025. I think this unit is stronger with Anton Harrison going into year 2. They bring in center Mitch Morse, who was 5th in pass blocking grade by PFF last season. You obviously hope that you can get more than a half season out of your starting left tackle too. So I think this unit is going to give Trevor Lawrence enough time in the pocket to hit more explosive passes in 2024.
All right, so where does that put this team in terms of a power rating?
Well, the Jaguars remind me a lot of the Packers, but they aren't getting nearly the same amount of hype. I mean, you look at it, Jordan Love averaged 6.4 yards per pass play last year, which is the exact same as Trevor Lawrence during his 2 years with Doug Peterson. Both of these offensive line were top 10 in pass blocking efficiency last year, based more on scheme than talent. And some may disagree with me, but I think the receiving core aren't that much different. I mean, I love Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, Gabe Davis, Brian Thomas. That's not that much of a difference from Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, and Luke Musgrave. Then both defenses have around league average talent, and they're bringing in a new coordinator to try help spark them into a top 10 unit. So I think the Jaguars are being slept on a little bit as a dark horse-ish team this season.
Well, the Packers play week 8 in Jacksonville this season, and the look-ahead line has the Packers favored by just 1.
And I think the Jaguars will be home favorites by the time we get to that game on October 27th.
Yeah, that'll be one to keep an eye out for. But let's shift it over to our next team. We've got the Tennessee Titans coming off that 6-11 season, and this is a new generation here. I mean, Vrabel is gone, and so is Derrick Henry. I mean, these were the staples of this team, but this was one of the last teams to adopt modern-day analytics, and it looks like they might have realized that passing the ball is an option in the NFL. So 2024, they've got a win total set at just 6.5.
Yeah, they hire Brian Callahan. They bring in wide receivers Tyler Boyd and Calvin Ridley. Clearly, Tennessee's offense is shifting to more of a pass focus. Now, Callahan was the offensive coordinator for the Bengals last year, who led the NFL in pass rate over expectation, despite Burrow clearly not being at full strength and backup Jake Browning getting 7 starts.
Yeah, what'd you make of Will Levis from last season?
Well, Levis was crazy. I mean, it was a crazy up and down performances we saw from him, and we got a wide range of outcomes we could expect from him coming into 2024. Levis panicked against the blitz, and he's really going to have to work on answers to that, or otherwise opposing defensive coordinators are going to hound him with the blitz going into this season. Levis was the only player in the NFL with an air yards per attempt above 10. Meanwhile, you look at it, Brian Callahan's Bengals were last in the NFL with just a 6.3 yard average depth of target. So there could be a little bit of a stylistic clash between coach and quarterback, like we talked about with Pittsburgh in the AFC North podcast. However, if Callahan can convince Levis to get rid of the ball quickly, he's already shown an ability to be effective there. Levis ranked 5th on EPA per dropback on first read throws in 2023.
Yeah, and honestly, he's going to need to get the ball out because last season was just not sustainable. I mean, Levis was hit on 25.5% of his dropbacks. For reference, the league average was 15%. So they did try to make some improvements to that line. I mean, they signed Lord Cushenberry, they drafted J.C. Latham, and they used first round draft pick on Skronsky last year.
Yeah, so they've been working to improve the offensive line, but I think the biggest change to help this offensive line is not personnel, it's the coach. Brian Callahan brings over his dad, Bill Callahan, who's one of the best offensive line coaches in NFL history. Now, Bill Callahan is going to have his work cut out for him on the right side with Dylan Raduns and Nicholas Petit-Ferrer. Neither of those guys have any business starting in the NFL. Raduns has a career 8% pressure rate allowed, and Petit-Ferrer has a career 9% pressure rate allowed. So, I mean, we've seen Callahan work miracles on the offensive line in the past, particularly with the Cleveland situation with the tackles last year. So maybe he can do it again. The Titans might not have the worst offensive line in the NFL anymore, but it's clearly the worst, at least in this division, by our metrics.
All right, well, Tennessee plucked another one off the Ravens defensive tree, bringing in Denard Wilson, a coordinator, and they completely revamped their secondary this offseason, adding Quandre Diggs, Chidobe Awuzie, and L'Jarius Sneed.
Yeah. And the Titans ranked 31st in dropback success rate allowed last year. And now we have the secondary ranked 3rd in the NFL. A massive change in talent there. However, the pass rush is a little bit of a concern. They still have Jeffrey Simmons, who ranked 10th in pass rushing efficiency last season, but nobody really around him after losing Danico Autry's 53 pressures. They drafted Tavondre Sweat and signed Sebastian Joseph Day, but both of those guys are more gap stuffers than pass rushers. This team ranked 16th in sack rate and 24th in pressure rate last season, but it's looking like a bottom 5-ish pass rush to me going into 2024.
Yeah, I think Tennessee clearly thinks they're going to win based on all these guys they brought in this offseason, but do you have them as a playoff team?
I don't. I'm more in line with the market on this one. I mean, I'm willing to move off my prior quickly if Levis clicks in this offense, but we've got first-time play callers on both sides of the ball here. I think this team's still a year away. They just need more dudes in the trenches on both offense and defense. I think teams are really going to bully the Titans up front this season.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our next segment. We've got the fantasy corner, and who are you looking to target in this division?
I've got Gabe Davis going at wide receiver 62 in Best Ball Mania on Underdog, and I think that's just way too low, but I understand why he's going that low because people soured on Gabe Davis based off of him underperforming ADP in 2 straight seasons. He went wide receiver 17 in 2022 and finished wide receiver 27. Then he got drafted wide receiver 34 last year and finished wide receiver 40. But I mean, Gabe Davis is a good player. He finished 20th in EPA per target last year. He got nearly twice as much EPA per target as Stephon Diggs and 4 times as much as Dalton Kincaid in that Bills offense last year. The Jaguars gave him $24 million guaranteed, and he's going to be on the field a ton in this above-average offense.
Yeah, and something to note. I mean, Christian Kirk was excluded from 2 wide receiver sets in Jacksonville's preseason opener. I mean, they had Gabe Davis and rookie Brian Thomas Jr. as the wide receivers and 12 personnel.
Yeah, I think Gabe Davis is going to end up getting 100 targets, something like 800 yards and 6 touchdowns with some real spike week potential in there.
Yeah, so that's basically like wide receiver 50. So, I mean, it feels like great value there. But the last segment we've got here is a bet for the people. Tan, what do you have for us?
AFC South bet, I'm going with Colts under 8.5 wins. And I think the Colts distribution for wins has a positive skew this year due to the uncertainty with Anthony Richardson. He could hit in a big way, but I think it's more likely he needs another year to develop. And to my eyes, the market is confusing mean and median outcomes for this distribution. To get to Indy's median outcome being 8.5, you have to believe one of 2 things. Either this defense is going to make a jump from 28th in market to league average after making 0 free agent additions, and they drafted Leatu Latu in the first round, but they lose Samson Ebukam to an Achilles in training camp. So I just don't see the defense making that huge jump. The other way you could see the median outcome being 8.5 is this is clearly a top 10 offense, to overcome that defense. But I would put them in the same offensive class as teams like the Rams or the Texans. And sure, it's possible, but I don't think that's the median outcome here. And last time I ran the sim, we had the Colts at 7.72 wins for 2024.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, Anthony Richardson still has less than 500 total pass attempts in college and pro combined. So I think it's reasonable to wait one more year for a Colts breakout here.
Yeah, I think people need to separate real life and fantasy expectations for Anthony Richardson. I mean, he could definitely still be one of the best fantasy football quarterbacks this season. We saw Justin Fields be QB6 in fantasy in year 2 while posting a 3-12 real life record.
Yep, I think that is the biggest thing. People cannot separate real life and fantasy, but that will do it for this week's episode. We'll be back next Friday to preview the exciting NFC West. And don't forget to check out drbobsports.com. We've got our NFL and college football packages as well as the weekly free analysis. So as always, thanks for watching and make sure to like and subscribe.